What's up guys, I hope you're having an amazing day. Videography skills are very valuable these days, so if you are someone who just started their videography journey and you went to YouTube for advice, chances are you've come across some good but also some bad advice in this platform. I'm not saying this is specific to YouTube, and I'm also sure that that's also the case everywhere else, and I'm also not trying to pick and choose the negatives here, but I personally learned most of the things that I know on this platform on YouTube, and I'm very grateful for it. But some of those lessons that I got from watching tutorials on YouTube turned out to be wrong when actually putting them in practice in real life. And in this video I want to talk about 5 of those lessons that I had to unlearn because when I put them in practice they just didn't work and ended up ruining my footage at some cases, and I just want to save you the time that it took me to learn that these things were wrong. Let's get to it. Alright, so the first thing is camera movement. At some point I heard that camera movement can make your footage more dynamic and more interesting. So from that point onwards, in every clip that I shot, I tried to include some kind of left or right panning movements, or up or down, or zooming in and out. I really got obsessed with moving my camera all over the place, and it took me longer than I want to admit to realize that that was actually one of the things that was ruining my video footage. And I'm talking about 2 costs or 2 side effects of moving the camera around all the time, which I noticed in my clips. The first side effect of camera movement is that it can make the viewers aware of the camera at all times, which makes it impossible or at least difficult for them to dive into the footage and concentrate on what's happening. And the second side effect of camera movement, which I noticed in lots of my video clips, was a feeling of dizziness. Have you noticed that in your clips as well? If you have, then maybe it's time to start moving the camera so much. You probably need to become friends with your tripod again and introduce a lot more static shots to your footage. And if you think that these static shots look boring, then the reason is probably because there isn't enough going on in your footage. You might have to concentrate on making your subjects move a little more instead of compensating with camera movement. The second thing that I had to unlearn was that slow motion makes your footage look epic. In order for me personally to understand that slow motion in most cases was unnecessary, I had to make a switch in the way I think about it. To use slow motion in order to emphasize single actions happening in the frame instead of multiple actions. Let's take for example walking. If you're filming your subject or yourself walking, if you do it in slow motion, you're probably only concentrating on one step, and if you're doing it in a normal 24 frames per second footage, you are presenting to your viewer multiple steps, so the walking itself. Now the crucial element here is that with slow motion, you are reducing the amount of information that you are sharing with your viewers, whereas if you shoot it in 24 frames per second, you're at the same period of time, you're giving your viewers more information. And from my experience, I can say that in order to keep the viewers more engaged with your videos, you have to share more information with them in the specific amount of time that they're watching your video instead of less. That is counterproductive, and that's why I think that slow motion should be used very carefully. The third lesson that I had to unlearn was always shooting in log. In the beginning, when I learned about log, that it gives you a more dynamic range and it makes the video footage looks more cinematic, then I started immediately shooting everything in log, and then for the longest of time I was unhappy with the result that I was getting from my camera. But I blamed it on myself and on my skills. I was shooting with the Canon USR at the time when I started experimenting with log and learning about it. It's not a really good video camera, as I've also mentioned before on this channel, but also afterwards, after getting the R6 Mark II, I noticed that there are just some situations where shooting in log will definitely make your footage look worse. And specifically I've noticed because I do a lot of client work for bars and restaurants. When you go inside of a restaurant, it's always a better idea to shoot in Rec 709. I think the reason why log footage often indoors or in restaurants in this case doesn't look good is because of the color temperature, mainly. You have to deal with the daylight coming from the windows, you have to deal with the lights on the ceiling and the lights on the counter. And in most cases, these 3 different lights are in different color temperatures. So the chance that you will get the right color temperature for any given frame that you are trying to film inside of the restaurants are actually pretty low. Unless you are willing to take a lot of time for it, of course, but that's counterproductive, so I don't know why you would do it. But the situations where I find the log footage to work better is when you have control lighting, like for example this studio, but also if you're shooting outdoors, you can easily get pleasing colors when you use log footage. But otherwise, as a rule of thumb, I would say if you're not sure if the color temperatures are going to match or the footage will look good in log, and you'll get that feeling with some experience by making some mistakes obviously, then just don't risk it and go with Rec 709. The fourth thing that I was doing wrong and I had to unlearn was always shooting in manual. I have noticed, especially in situations where within the same clip you have two different frames on different levels of brightness, that the transition between the two frames is always smoother if you put the camera, for example, in automatic ISO instead of if you do it manually. Most of the time when I try to make this transition manually, I either overdo it and I have to bring the ISO back to the correct exposure level, or I don't do it enough and then I have to make it in like multiple steps, like first I increase it a little bit, then I increase it again a little bit, and that just looks terrible and ruins your footage when you look at it afterwards. Also, you have to consider that if you are controlling everything manually all of the time, you're taking away some of the concentration capabilities of your brain from making, for example, a better framing for your footage, and you are using it instead of operating the camera. So it's always a give or take situation. Don't think that if you're not all the time shooting everything in manual that you're not a real videographer, like some people on this platform might say. The fifth thing that I had to unlearn was thinking that a wide aperture lens and a camera which is capable of shooting like clean footage in high ISO can make up for lack of good lighting. The truth is that lighting is the most important thing for the look of your footage. And also a very important thing to mention at this point is that even if you get a lens with a wide aperture, probably the best image that you'll get out of that lens will not be with the aperture wide open. It will be if you stop the aperture 1 or 2 stops down. So simply knowing this fact about these wide aperture lenses should be enough to make you think about it. I have one bonus tip for you, and that is to not follow the rules blindly. If you find yourself in a project where you're looking at the back of your screen and you're not so sure if that's the right look that you want for your footage, don't do it just because I said it or because someone else said it. Be flexible and change your approach. Change your settings, change your lighting, change your lens, whatever you have to do to make it pleasing for you, even if you have to go against some of the rules that you heard on YouTube or somewhere else at some point. Alright, that was it with this video, guys. If you found it helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also consider subscribing to the channel because I have a lot more content like this that is hopefully helpful coming your way. I'll see you in the next one.